I'm Alexander Alec, and this is the Foxfire Podcast, where we explore shamanism, safety, and culture. I'm Alexander Alec. Welcome to the Foxfire Podcast. Today, I'm here with Annika Berman, and in this episode, we will be talking about the first button. Hello, Annika.
Hello, Alexander. So let's jump right in. Why is this called the first button?
I first heard this term from an elder some years ago, and it really stayed with me. She talked about the first button as being the most important step in your work and in your training. She talked about this in the sense of, like, if you do the first button wrong, all the buttons are wrong. And I really took this to heart, and when I'm working with people, I refer back to this quite a bit because it's so important that we begin well. If we get off on the wrong foot, you can do as much work as you want, but you'll never get it sorted, so to say, until you really go back to that very, very first starting place, which for some people is impossible to do. An example would be if you come in to shamanism from a very mental point of view, let's say, or you learned about it for self-development or you learned about it from a psychological point of view. What can happen is then it's you're in a very tight box, basically, and that will be hard to really work with in shamanism, because shamanism has a completely different base and a completely different worldview. So, again, if the first button is wrong when you start, all the buttons are going to be wrong. Another way to say this is in our school, and from my experience, we have the most experienced teachers teaching the people who are just beginning. And that is really, I would say, your most important time is when you're coming in to the work. If you have somebody who's also just beginning, teaching you just how to begin, they're not going to give you a very good starting point. Again, that first button's going to probably be wrong, and they're going to carry that around with you, well, kind of forever. So, I would say be really, really careful how you begin, and you want somebody who's very experienced to help you start, and to help you build up that worldview before you, right in this beginning. Build up your relationships from the very beginning. Build up your connection from the very beginning, and that's going to carry you. You're going to have a good foundation to build on.
Yeah. So you mentioned a few very important things here for a good beginning, for beginning well, and one thing you mentioned was the worldview, and I think you're talking about the shamanic worldview here. And how is that different, or can you describe that?
Certainly, that's a really good question. The shamanic worldview sees us as humans. It sees us as someone with a mind or mental aspect, as a heart or emotional aspect, as a physical body, but also as a spirit, that we have our own spirit and even soul. The soul is not something I talk about so much because that's hard to put into words. But let's simplify it and say mind, heart, body, and spirit. And so we'll begin there with ourselves. Okay. If we go beyond that, then we look at not only ourselves as something or someone, a being with a spirit, but we can also look at the spirit aspect of a place, a plant, an animal, and a stone. We can look at the spirit of the earth, of the stars, and beyond. So it brings us to everything around us is alive. Everything around us you can communicate with. Everything around us has its way, its life, its lifespan, its purpose, its journey or direction. And I guess most importantly is that everything is alive and you can communicate with everything. So that would be the simplest way I can explain the shamanic worldview.
So if everything is alive and everything has a spirit, what does that mean practically? What does this worldview mean for how we live our lives?
Well, what that means is we have to really kind of go big here. And what that means is that we want to live, I would say, a good life. We want to live a balanced life. And we want to live a life in good relationship. And what that means is good communication, within ourselves and within the human people around us, but also with the earth and our environment, the plants, the animals, the stones and elements. But that also means being in relationship with however we think of what's bigger than us. And I say that on purpose because in North America, we'd say Great Spirit, for example. And I do use that term and prefer that term. But I recognize and respect that everyone's going to have a bit of a different term, in their own language or in their own concept or cosmology, of the world. And I think the common denominator there is something that's greater than us and also something that we can communicate with or we strive to communicate with. So what we want to do is within this worldview, and the reason we have this worldview is we want to live a good life, and we want to do that in balance, and we want to do that in communication. And our practical way of looking at this, we want to, when things go out of balance, and they do, within us or within our human relationships or within our environment or these, I would say, like sometimes we have a crisis of who am I, where am I, why am I here, what's my purpose, or some people would say like a crisis of faith, for example, so is there something bigger than me? And if so, what does that all mean? So when things go out of balance, when we have these moments, when we have these crises, this gives us the possibility to communicate, to find out what is wrong, what went out of balance, and most importantly, how can we put things back into balance? How can we be again in good relation? How again can we put things right, basically?
So how do I ask these questions, and how do this work? You just mentioned, okay, you ask, you try to find out how to be in balance. So how would that work?
Well, one of the defining features in shamanism is trance. The method or the action of trance. And I always like to say, if there's no trance, then there's no shamanism. Trance is the way that we communicate with our spirit. We can communicate with the spirits around us, again, of another person or place, or animal or earth and things like this. Trance is learnable. Trance is accessible with training. But what I want to point out here is that before, long before we're ever going to start going into trance, there has to be a need, a need. It's like a reason, but it's more importantly, it's specifically a need. Like someone is sick, and so there's a need to find out what happened and what's out of balance and how to fix it. Need is your first step. It's basically your first button. After need is then intention, and then after that is method, and then after that is the work you do to help restore things. So that would be an example, let's say, of why to communicate and how to communicate.
So I've got my needs sorted, and I've formed my intention, and now I want to go find an answer.
Okay.
Go into trance. So what happens?
Okay. Well, there's two things here that are going to happen. One is that you're going to through trance alter your consciousness temporarily so that you can communicate with the spirit or spirits that you need to find this answer. But the other part of that is you're also that through that action of trance, and going into an altered state of consciousness, you're going to then be accessing an alternate world. Now, that's a big topic. Alternate world is something in the shamanic worldview that runs parallel to, let's say, our daily lives. It's always there. It continues to run parallel next to us. And so the action of trance and altering your consciousness is what will take you into this alternate world or state. And I want to point out that that is a temporary thing to do. I think one thing, and we'll talk about this through the podcast series, season 1, is I run into a lot of misunderstandings. I run into a lot of myths. And one of those misunderstandings is that we're just trying to get into, an altered state of consciousness. And, well, when you sleep, you're in an altered state of consciousness. If you go for surgery, they will put you into an altered state of consciousness. If you have an accident and go into a coma, you're in an altered state of consciousness. And if you take certain drugs, you'll be in an altered state of consciousness. This is not necessarily functional. It doesn't mean you can hold the need, hold the intention, go get the information, and returning from that alternate world, and then bringing that into practice, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. It's not play with these states. It is to go find an answer that hopefully you can apply and will help whatever person or situation that's out of balance return to balance.
The altered state of consciousness is a vehicle. It's not it's not the goal.
Correct.
It's what takes us to the goal.
Right. Yeah. Again, I think that's a really big misunderstanding, is that we're just trying to change our state of consciousness, and we do that all the time. We do that when we dream.
I think I do that when I read a book.
Oh, right. Yes. Absolutely. I was talking to a friend recently who was talking about listening, to music as she writes, and that is a perfect example, of listening to music. Your state of consciousness is altered, and in that state, you may create, art. You may paint. You may write. You may dance. That is that state. Yeah.
We've been talking about some important aspects of shamanism, about the worldview and trance, but we haven't really defined shamanism itself. So let's do that in the next episode.
We can start right there. The Foxfire Podcast is hosted and produced by me, Alexander Alec. Co-hosted by Annika Berman. This season's theme by Century Music. Special thanks to Kati Meaden and Christian Roth at goyippie.net, Ellie Hale and Rhiannon Morgan at University of Birmingham, and to the whole team at the Foxfire Foundation in Berlin, Germany. You can find us at foxfirepodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. If you visit our website, you can send us questions or topics you'd like to hear about. We also have resources and some extras. For our release schedule and behind-the-scenes pics, we are on Instagram at Foxfire Podcast. Until next time.